The Man in the Iron Mask. Capital I. The legend. The mystery of the Man in the Iron Mask is, despite a pleasant saying of Lord Beaconsfield's, one of the most fascinating in history. By a curious coincidence, the wildest legend on the subject, and the correct explanation of the problem, were offered to the world in the same year, 1801. According to this form of the legend, the Man in the Iron Mask was the genuine Louis Xiv, deprived of his rights in favor of a child of Anne of Austria and of Mazarin, immured in the Isle Sainte Marguerite, in the Bay of Cannes, where you are shown his cell, looking north to the sunny town. He married, and begot a son. That son was carried to Corsica, was named de Buonaparte, and was the ancestor of Napoleon. The emperor was thus the legitimate representative of the House of Bourbon. This legend was circulated in 1801, and is referred to in a proclamation of the Royalists of La Vendée. In the same year, 1801, Rufus Alack, a citoyen and a revolutionary legislator, published a work in which he asserted that the Man in the Iron Mask, as known in rumor, was not one man, but a myth, in which the actual facts concerning at least two men were blended. It is certain that Rufus Alack was right, or that, if he was wrong, the Man in the Iron Mask was an obscure valet, of French birth, residing in England, whose real name was Martin. Before we enter on the topic of this poor menial's tragic history, it may be as well to trace the progress of the romantic legend, as it blossomed after the death of the man, whose mask was not of iron, but of black velvet. Later we shall show how the legend struck root and flowered, from the moment when the poor valet, Martin by his prison pseudonym Eustache Dorger, was immured in the French fortress of Pignerol, in Piedmont, August 1669. The man, in connection with the mask, is first known to us from a kind of notebook kept by Du Junker, lieutenant of the Bastille. On the 18th of September, 1698, he records the arrival of the new governor of the Bastille, M. de Saint-Mars, bringing with him, from his last place, the Isle Sainte Marguerite, in the Bay of Cannes, an old prisoner whom he had at Pignerol. He keeps the prisoner always masked. His name is not spoken, and I have put him alone, in the third chamber of the Bertaudiere Tower, having furnished it some days before with everything, by order of M. de Saint-Mars. The prisoner is to be served and cared for by M. de Rossages, the officer next in command under Saint-Mars. 1. Funk Brentano, Legends et Archives de la Bastille, pages 86, 87, Paris, 1898, page 277. A facsimile of this entry. The prisoner's death is entered by Du Junker on November 19, 1703. To that entry we return later. The existence of this prisoner was known and excited curiosity. On the 15th of October, 1711, the Princess Palatine wrote about the case to the Electress Sophia of Hanover. A man lived for long years in the Bastille, masked, and masked he died there. 2 musketeers were by his side to shoot him if ever he unmasked. He ate and slept in his mask. There must, doubtless, have been some good reason for this, as otherwise he was very well treated, well lodged, and had everything given to him that he wanted. He took the communion masked, was very devout, and read perpetually. On the 22nd of October, 1711, the princess writes that the mask was an English nobleman, mixed up in the plot of the Duke of Berwick against William III. Fenwick's affair is meant. He was imprisoned and masked that the Dutch usurper might never know what had become of him. 1. Opposite 98. Note I. The legend was now afloat in society. The sub-commandant of the Bastille from 1749 to 1787, Chevalier, declared, obviously on the evidence of tradition, that all the mask's furniture and clothes were destroyed at his death, lest they might yield a clue to his identity. Louis XV is said to have told Madame de Pompadour that the mask was the minister of an Italian prince. Louis V told Marie Antoinette, according to Madame de Campan, that the mask was a Mantuan intriguer, the same person as Louis XV indicated. Perhaps he was. It is one of 2 possible alternatives. Voltaire, in the first edition of his Siècle de Louis Xiv, merely spoke of a young, handsome, masked prisoner, treated with the highest respect by Lavoisier, the minister of Louis Xiv. At last, in Questions sur l'Encyclopédie, 2nd edition, Voltaire averred that the mask was the son of Anne of Austria and Mazarin, an elder brother of Louis Xiv. Changes were rung on this note. The mask was the actual king. Louis Ziv was a bastard. Others held that he was James, Duke of Monmouth, or Moliere. In 1770 he identified him with Machiavelli, the Mantuan intriguer, and especially after the appearance of the book by Rufus Alac. In 1801, that was the generally accepted opinion. It may be true, in part. Machiavelli may have been the prisoner who died in the Bastille in November 1703, but the legend of the mask's prison life undeniably arose out of the adventure of our valet, Martin or Eustache Dorger. 2. The valet's history. After reading the arguments of the advocates of Machiavelli, I could not but perceive that, whatever captive died, masked, at the Bastille in 1703, the valet Dorger was the real source of most of the legends about the man in the iron mask. A study of M. Laire's book Nicolas Fouquet, 1890, confirmed this opinion. I therefore pushed the inquiry into a source neglected by the French historians, namely, the correspondence of the English ambassadors, agents, and statesmen for the years 1668, 1669. 1 result is to confirm a wild theory of my own to the effect that the man in the iron mask, if Dorger were he, may have been as great a mystery to himself as to historical inquirers. He may not have known what he was imprisoned for doing. More important is the probable conclusion that the long and mysterious captivity of Eustache Dorger, and of another perfectly harmless valet and victim, was the mere automatic result of red tape of the old French absolute monarchy. These wretches were caught in the toils of the system, and suffered to no purpose, for no crime. The two men, at least Dorger, were apparently mere supernumeraries in the obscure intrigue of a conspirator known as Rue de Marseille. 1. The papers are in the Record Office. For the content see the following essay, The Valet's Master. This truly abominable tragedy of Rue de Marseille is another story, narrated in the following essay. It must suffice here to say that, in 1669, while Charles II was negotiating the famous, or infamous, secret treaty with Louis Ziv, the Treaty of Alliance against Holland, and in favor of the restoration of Roman Catholicism in England, Rue de Marseille, a French Huguenot, was dealing with Arlington and others, in favor of a Protestant league against France. When he started from England for Switzerland in February 1669, Marseille left in London a valet called by him Martin, who had quitted his service and was living with his own family. This man is the Eustache Dorger of our mystery. The name is his prison pseudonym, as Lestang was that of Machiavelli. The French government was anxious to lay hands on him, for he had certainly, as the letters of Marseille prove, come and gone freely between that conspirator and his English employers. How much Dorger knew, what amount of mischief he could effect, was uncertain. Much or little, it was a matter which, strange to say, caused the greatest anxiety to Louis Ziv and to his ministers for very many years. Probably long before Dorger died, the date is unknown, but it was more than 25 years after Marseille's execution. His secret, if secret he possessed, had ceased to be of importance. But he was now in the toils of the French red tape, the system of secrecy which rarely released its victim. He was guarded, we shall see, with such unheard of rigor that popular fancy at once took him for some great, perhaps royal, personage. Marseille was publicly tortured to death in Paris on the 22nd of June, 1669. By the 19th of July his ex-valet, Dorger, had entered on his mysterious term of captivity. How the French got possession of him, whether he yielded to cajolery, or was betrayed by Charles II, is uncertain. The French ambassador at St. James's, Colbert, brother of the celebrated minister, writes thus to M. de Lyon, in Paris, on July 1669. 1. Monsieur Joly has spoken to the man Martin Dorger, and has really persuaded him that, by going to France and telling all that he knows against Rue, he will play the part of a lad of honor and a good subject. 1. Transcripts from Paris MSS, volumes XXI, Record Office. But Martin, after all, was not persuaded. Martin replied to Joly that he knew nothing at all, and that, once in France, people would think he was well acquainted with the traffickings of Rue, and so he would be kept in prison to make him divulge what he did not know. The possible man in the iron mask did not know his own secret, but, later in the conversation, Martin foolishly admitted that he knew a great deal. Perhaps he did this out of mere fatal vanity. Cross to France, however, he would not, even when offered a safe conduct and promise of reward. Colbert therefore proposes to ask Charles to surrender the valet, and probably Charles descended to the meanness. By the 19th of July, at all events, Lavois, the war minister of Louis XI, was bidding Saint Mars, at Pignerol in Piedmont, expect from Dunkirk a prisoner of the very highest importance, a valet. This valet, now called Eustache d'Orge, can only have been Marseille's valet, Martin, who, by one means or another, had been brought from England to Dunkirk. It is hardly conceivable, at least, that when a valet, in England, is wanted by the French police on the 1st of July, for political reasons, and when by the 19th of July they have caught a valet of extreme political importance, the two valets should be two different men. Martin must be d'Orge. Here, then, by the 19th of July, 1669, we find our unhappy serving man in the toils. Why was he to be handled with such mysterious rigor? It is true that state prisoners of very little account were kept with great secrecy, but it cannot well be argued that they were all treated with the extraordinary precautions which, in the case of d'Orge, were not relaxed for 25 or 30 years. The king says, according to Lavois, that the safe-keeping of d'Orge is of the last importance to his service. He must have intercourse with nobody. His windows must be where nobody can pass. Several bolted doors must cut him off from the sound of human voices. Saint Mars himself, the commandant, must feed the valet daily. You must never, under any pretenses, listen to what he may wish to tell you. You must threaten him with death if he speaks one word except about his actual needs. He is only a valet, and does not need much furniture. 1. The letters are printed by Rufus Alac, Young, Lair, and others. Saint Mars replied that, in presence of M. de Voroy, the chief officer of Dunkirk, who carried d'Orge thence to Pignerol, he had threatened to run d'Orge through the body if he ever dared to speak, even to him, Saint Mars. He has mentioned this prisoner, he says, to no mortal. People believe that d'Orge is a marshal of France. So strange and unusual are the precautions taken for his security. A marshal of France. The legend has begun. At this time, 1669, Saint Mars had in charge Fouquet, the great fallen minister, the richest and most dangerous subject of Louis XI. By and by he also held Lauzun, the adventurous wooer of La Grande Mademoiselle. But it was not they, it was the valet, d'Orge, who caused sensation. On the 20th of February, 1672, Saint Mars, for the sake of economy, wished to use d'Orge as valet to Lauzun. This proves that Saint Mars did not, after all, see the necessity of secluding d'Orge or thought the king's fears groundless. In the opinion of Saint Mars, d'Orge did not want to be released, would never ask to be set free. Then why was he so anxiously guarded? Lavois refused to let d'Orge be put with Lauzun as valet. In 1675, however, he allowed d'Orge to act as valet to Fouquet, but with Lauzun, said Lavois, d'Orge must have no intercourse. Fouquet had then another prisoner valet, La Riviere. This man had apparently been accused of no crime. He was of a melancholy character, and a dropsical habit of body. Fouquet had amused himself by doctoring him and teaching him to read. In the month of December, 1678, Saint Mars, the commandant of the prison, brought to Fouquet a sealed letter from Lavois, the seal unbroken. His own reply was also to be sealed, and not to be seen by Saint Mars. Lavois wrote that the king wished to know one thing, before giving Fouquet ample liberty. Had his valet, Eustache d'Orge, told his other valet, La Riviere, what he had done before coming to Pignerol de ce qu'il est employé au prevent que d'être à Pignerol? His Majesty bids me ask you, Fouquet, this question, and expects that you will answer without considering anything but the truth, that he may know what measures to take, these depending on whether d'Orge has, or has not, told La Riviere the story of his past life. 1. Moreover, Lauzun was never, said Lavois, to be allowed to enter Fouquet's room when d'Orge was present. The humorous point is that, thanks to a hole dug in the wall between his room and Fouquet's, Lauzun saw d'Orge whenever he pleased. 1. Lair, Nicolas Fouquet, 2 pages 463, 464. From the letter of Lavois to Fouquet, about d'Orge, the 23rd of December, 1678, it is plain that Louis XI had no more pressing anxiety, 9 years after d'Orge's arrest, than to conceal what it was that d'Orge had done. It is apparent that Saint Mars himself either was unacquainted with this secret, or was supposed by Lavazza and the king to be unaware of it. He had been ordered never to allow Dorja to tell him. He was not allowed to see the letters on the subject between Lawson and Fouquet. We still do not know, and never shall know, whether Dorja himself knew his own secret, or whether, as he had anticipated, he was locked up for not divulging what he did not know. The answer of Fouquet to Lavazza must have satisfied Louis that Dorja had not imparted his secret to the other valet, La Riviere, for Fouquet was now allowed a great deal of liberty. In 1679, he might see his family, the officers of the garrison, and Lawson, it being provided that Lawson and Dorja should never meet. In March 1680, Fouquet died, and henceforth the two valets were most rigorously guarded. Dorja, because he was supposed to know something. La Riviere, because Dorja might have imparted the real or fancied secret to him. We shall return to these poor serving men, but here it is necessary to state that, 10 months before the death of their master, Fouquet, an important new captive had been brought to the prison of Pignerol. This captive was the other candidate for the honors of the mask, Count Machilli, the secretary of the Duke of Mantua. He was kidnapped on Italian soil on the 2nd of May, 1679, and hurried to the mountain fortress of Pignerol, then on French ground. His offense was the betraying of the secret negotiations for the cession of the town and fortress of Cassel, by the Duke of Mantua, to Louis XI. The disappearance of Machilli was, of course, known to the world. The cause of his enlèvement, and the place of his captivity, Pignerol, were matters of newspaper comment at least as early as 1687. Still earlier, in 1682, the story of Machilli's arrest and seclusion in Pignerol had been published in a work named La Prudenza Triomphante di Cassel. 1. There was thus no mystery, at the time, about Machilli. His crime and punishment were perfectly well known to students of politics. He has been regarded as the mysterious man in the Iron Mask, but, for years after his arrest, he was the least mysterious of state prisoners. 1. Brentano, opposite, page 117. Here, then, is Machilli in Pignerol in May, 1679. While Fouquet then enjoyed relative freedom, while Lawson schemed escapes or made insulting love to Mademoiselle Fouquet, Machilli lived on the bread and water of affliction. He was threatened with torture to make him deliver up some papers compromising Louis XI. It was expressly commanded that he should have nothing beyond the barest necessaries of life. He was to be kept dans la dure prison. In brief, he was used no better than the meanest of prisoners. The awful life of isolation, without employment, without books, without writing materials, without sight or sound of man save when Saint Mars or his lieutenant brought food for the day, drove captives mad. In January 1680, 2 prisoners, a monk, 1, and 1 Dubreuil, had become insane. By the 14th of February, 1680, Machilli was daily conversing with God and his angels. I believe his brain is turned, says Saint Mars. In March 1680, as we saw, Fouquet died. The prisoners, not counting Lawson, released soon after, were now 5. 1. Machilli, mad. 2. Dubreuil, mad. 3. The monk, mad. 4. Dorja, and 5. La Riviere. These 2, being employed as valets, kept their wits. On the death of Fouquet, Lavazza wrote to Saint Mars about the 2 valets. Lawson must be made to believe that they had been set at liberty, but, in fact, they must be most carefully guarded in a single chamber. They were shut up in one of the dungeons of the Tour d'en Basse. Dorja had recently done something as to which Lavazza writes, let me know how Dorja can possibly have done what you tell me, and how he got the necessary drugs, as I cannot suppose that you supplied him with them the 10th of July, 1680. 2. 1. A monk, who may have been this monk, appears in the following essay, page 34, infra. 2. Lair, Nicolas Fouquet. 2. Pages 476, 477. Here, then, by July 1680, are the 2 valets locked in one dungeon of the Tour d'en Basse. By September Saint Mars had placed Machilli, with the mad monk, in another chamber of the same tower. He writes, Machilli is almost as mad as the monk, who arose from bed and preached naked. Machilli behaved so rudely and violently that the lieutenant of Saint Mars had to show him a whip, and threatened him with a flogging. This had its effect. Machilli, to make his peace, offered a valuable ring to Blainvilliers. The ring was kept to be restored to him, if ever Louis let him go free, a contingency mentioned more than once in the correspondence. Apparently Machiavelli now sobered down, and probably was given a separate chamber and a valet. He certainly had a valet at Pignerol later. By May 1681, Dorger and Lariviere still occupied their common chamber in the Tour d'en Basse. They were regarded by Lauvois as the most important of the 5 prisoners then at Pignerol. They, not Machiavelli, were the captives about whose safe and secret keeping Louis and Lauvois were most anxious. This appears from a letter of Lauvois to Saint Mars, of the 12th of May, 1681. The jailer, Saint Mars, is to be promoted from Pignerol to exiles. Thither, says Lauvois, the king desires to transport such of your prisoners as he thinks too important to have in other hands than yours. These prisoners are the 2 in the low chamber of the tower, the 2 valets, Dorger and Lariviere. From a letter of Saint Mars, June, 1681, we know that Machiavelli was not one of these. He says, I shall keep at exiles 2 birds, merles, whom I have here. They are only known as the gentry of the low room in the tower. Machiavelli may stay on here at Pignerol with the other prisoners, Dubruil and the mad monk. It is at this point that Le Citoyen Roux, Fazelac, writing in the year IX of the Republic, 1801, loses touch with the secret. 1. Roux finds, in the state papers, the arrival of Eustache Dorger at Pignerol in 1669, but does not know who he is, or what is his quality. He sees that the mask must be either Machiavelli, Dorger, the monk, 1 Dubruil, or 1 Calasio, but, overlooking or not having access to the letter of Saint Mars of June, 1681, Roux holds that the prisoners taken to Les Exiles were the monk and Machiavelli. One of these must be the mask, and Roux votes for Machiavelli. He is wrong. Machiavelli beyond all doubt remained at Pignerol. 1. Recherches historiques sur le homme au masque de fer, Paris, N. IX. Mountains of argument have been built on these words. De Merles, 2 jailbirds. One of the 2, we shall see, became the source of the legend of the man in the iron mask. How can a wretched jailbird, Merle, have been the mask, asks M. Topin. The rogue's whole furniture and table linen were sold for 1 litre 19s. He only got a new suit of clothes every 3 years, all very true. But this jailbird and his mate, by the direct statement of Lauvois, are the prisoners too important to be entrusted to other hands than yours, the hands of Saint Mars, while Machiavelli is so unimportant that he may be left at Pignerol under Villebois. The truth is, that the offense and the punishment of Machiavelli were well known to European diplomatists and readers of books. Castle, moreover, at this time was openly ceded to Louis Xiv, and Machiavelli could not have told the world more than it already knew. But, for some inscrutable reason, the secret which Dorger knew, or was suspected of knowing, became more and more a source of anxiety to Lauvois and Louis. What can he have known? The charges against his master, Roux de Marseille, had been publicly proclaimed. 12 years had passed since the dealings of Arlington with Marseille. Yet, Lauvois became more and more nervous. In accordance with commands of his, on the 2nd of March, 1682, the 2 valets, who had hitherto occupied 1 chamber at Exiles as at Pignerol, were cut off from all communication with each other. Says Saint Mars, since receiving your letter I have warded the pair as strictly and exactly as I did M. Fouquet and M. Lawson, who cannot brag that he sent or received any intelligence. Night and day 2 sentinels watch their tower, and my own windows command a view of the sentinels. Nobody speaks to my captives but myself, my lieutenant, their confessor, and the doctor, who lives 18 miles away, and only sees them when I am present. Years went by. In January, 1687, one of the 2 captives died. We really do not know which with absolute certainty. However, the intensified secrecy with which the survivor was now guarded seems more appropriate to Dorger, and M. Funk Brentano and M. Lair have no doubt that it was Lariviere who expired. He was dropsical. That appears in the official correspondence, and the dead prisoner died of dropsy. As for the strange secrecy about Dorger, here is an example. Saint Mars, in January, 1687, was appointed to the fortress of the Isle Sainte Marguerite, that sun themselves in the Bay of Cannes. On the 20th of January he asks leave to go to see his little kingdom. He must leave Dorger, but has forbidden even his lieutenant to speak to that prisoner. This was an increase of precaution since 1682. He wishes to take the captive to the Isles. But how? A sedan chair covered over with oilcloth seems best. A litter might break down. Litters often did, and someone might then see the passenger. Now M. Funk Brentano says, to minimize the importance of Dorja, he was shut up like so much luggage in a chair hermetically closed with oilcloth. Carried by 8 Piedmontese relays of 4. Luggage is not usually carried in hermetically sealed sedan chairs, but St. Mars has explained why. By surplus of precaution, he did not use a litter. The litter might break down and Dorja might be seen. A new prison was built specially, at the cost of 5,000 liras, for Dorja at St. Marguerite, with large sunny rooms. On the 3rd of May, 1687, St. Mars had entered on his island realm, Dorja being nearly killed by 12 days' journey in a closed chair. He again excited the utmost curiosity. On the 8th of January, 1688, St. Mars writes that his prisoner is believed by the world to be either a son of Oliver Cromwell, or the Duc de Beaufort, one, who was never seen again, dead or alive, after a night battle in Crete, on the 25th of June, 1669, just before Dorja was arrested. St. Mars sent in a note of the total of Dorja's expenses for the year 1687. He actually did not dare to send the items, he says, lest they, if the bill fell into the wrong hands, might reveal too much. 1. Duc de Beaufort whom Athos releases from prison in Dumas's Vingt-Ans-Après. Meanwhile, an Italian newsletter, copied into a Leiden paper, of August 1687, declared that Machilli had just been brought from Pignerol to St. Marguerite. There was no mystery about Machilli. The story of his capture was published in 1682, but the press, on one point, was in error. Machilli was still at Pignerol. The known advent of the late commandant of Pignerol, St. Mars, with a single concealed prisoner, at the island, naturally suggested the erroneous idea that the prisoner was Machilli. The prisoner was really Dorja, the survivor of the 2 valets. From 1688 to 1691 no letter about Dorja has been published. Apparently he was then the only prisoner on the island, except one Chesert, who was there before Dorja arrived, and gave up his chamber to Dorja while the new cells were being built. Between 1689 and 1693 6 Protestant preachers were brought to the island, while Lavois, the minister, died in 1691, and was succeeded by Barbizux. On the 13th of August, 1691, Barbizux wrote to ask St. Mars about the prisoner whom he had guarded for 20 years. The only such prisoner was Dorja, who entered Pignerol in August, 1669. Machilli had been a prisoner only for 12 years, and lay in Pignerol, not in St. Marguerite, where St. Mars now was. St. Mars replied, I can assure you that nobody has seen him but myself. By the beginning of March, 1694, Pignerol had been bombarded by the enemies of France. Presently Louis's had to cede it to Savoy. The prisoners there must be removed. Machilli, in Pignerol, at the end of 1693, had been in trouble. He and his valet had tried to smuggle out letters written on the linings of their pockets. These were seized and burned. On the 20th of March, 1694, Barbizux wrote to Lepre, now commanding at Pignerol, that he must take his 3 prisoners, one by one, with all secrecy, to St. Marguerite. Lepre alone must give them their food on the journey. The military officer of the escort was warned to ask no questions. Already, the 26th of February, 1694, Barbizux had informed St. Mars that these prisoners were coming. They are of more consequence, one of them at least, than the prisoners on the island, and must be put in the safest places. The one is doubtless Machilli. In 1681 Lavois had thought Dorja and La Riviere more important than Machilli, who, in March, 1694, came from Pignerol to St. Marguerite. Now in April, 1694, a prisoner died at the island, a prisoner who, like Machilli, had a valet. We hear of no other prisoner on the island, except Machilli who had a valet. A letter of St. Mars, the 6th of January, 1696, proves that no prisoner then had a valet, for each prisoner collected his own dirty plates and dishes, piled them up, and handed them to the lieutenant. M. Funk Brentano argues that in this very letter, the 6th of January, 1696, Saint Mars speaks of les valets de Messrs les Prisonniers, but in that part of the letter Saint Mars is not speaking of the actual state of things at Saint Marguerite, but is giving reminiscences of Fouquet and Lawson, who, of course, at Pigoural, had valets, and had money, as he shows. Dorja had no money. M. Funk Brentano next argues that early in 1694 one of the preacher prisoners, Melzac, died, and cites Emung la vérité sur le masque de fer, page 91. This is odd, as Emung says that Melzac, or Malzac, died in the end of 1692, or early in 1693. Why, then, does M. Funk Brentano cite Emung for the death of the preacher early in 1694, when Emung conjecturally dates his decease at least a year earlier? 1. It is not a mere conjecture as, on the 3rd of March, 1693, Barbizux begs Saint Mars to mention his Protestant prisoners under nicknames. There are 3, and Malzac is no longer one of them. Malzac, in 1692, suffered from a horrible disease, discreditable to one of the godly, and in October, 1692, had been allowed medical expenses, whether they included a valet or not. Malzac seems to have been non-existent by March, 1693. Had he possessed a valet, and had he died in 1694, why should his valet have been shut up in the vaulted prison? This was the fate of the valet of the prisoner who died in April, 1694, and was probably Machiavelli. 1. M. Funk Brentano's statement is in Revue Historique, LVI page 298. Malzac died at the beginning of 1694, citing Jung, page 91. Now on page 91 M. Jung writes, at the beginning of 1694 Saint Mars had 6 prisoners, of whom one Malzac dies, but M. Jung pages 269, 270, later writes, it is probable that Malzac died at the end of 1692, or early in 1693, and he gives his reasons, which are convincing. M. Funk Brentano must have overlooked M. Jung's change of opinion between his page 91 and his pages 269, 270. Machiavelli, certainly, had a valet in December, 1693, at Pignerol. He went to Saint Marguerite in March, 1694. In April, 1694, a prisoner with a valet died at Saint Marguerite. In January, 1696, no prisoner at Saint Marguerite had a valet. Therefore, there is a strong presumption that the prisonnier or valet who died in April was Machiavelli. After December, 1693, when he was still at Pignerol, the name of Machiavelli, freely used before, never occurs in the correspondence, but we still often hear of l'ancien prisonnier, the old prisoner. He was, on the face of it, Dorja, by far the oldest prisoner. In 1688, Saint Mars, having only one prisoner, Dorja, calls him merely my prisoner. In 1691, when Saint Mars had several prisoners, Barbizux styles Dorja your prisoner of 20 years standing. When, in 1696 1698, Saint Mars mentions mon ancien prisonnier, my prisoner of long standing, he obviously means Dorja, not Machiavelli. Above all, if Machiavelli died in 1694, M. Funk Brentano argues that mon ancien prisonnier can only mean my erstwhile prisoner, he who was lost and is restored to me, that is, Machiavelli. This is not the view of M. Jung, or M. Lair, or M. Loisseleur. Friends of Machiavelli's claims rest much on this letter of Barbizux to Saint Mars November 17, 1697. You have only to watch over the security of all your prisoners, without ever explaining to anyone what it is that your prisoner of long standing did. That secret, it is argued, must apply to Machiavelli, but all the world knew what Machiavelli had done. Nobody knew, and nobody knows, what Eustache Dorja had done. It was one of the Arcana Imperii. It is the secret enforced ever since Dorja's arrest in 1669. Saint Mars, 1669, was not to ask. Louis Ziv could only lighten the captivity of Fouquet, 1678, if his valet, La Riviere, did not know what Dorja had done. La Riviere, apparently a harmless man, lived and died in confinement, the sole reason being that he might perhaps know what Dorja had done. Consequently, there is the strongest presumption that the ancien prisonnier of 1697 is Dorja, and that what he had done which Saint Mars must tell to no one, was what Dorja did, not what Machiavelli did. All Europe knew what Machiavelli had done. His whole story had been published to the world in 1682 and 1687. On the 19th of July, 1698, Barbizeux bade Saint Mars come to assume the command of the Bastille. He is to bring his old prisoner, whom not a soul is to see. Saint Mars therefore brought his man masked, exactly as another prisoner was carried masked from Provence to the Bastille in 1695. M. Funk Brentano argues that Saint Mars was now quite fond of his old Machiavelli, so noble, so learned. At last, on the 18th of September, 1698, Saint Mars lodged his old prisoner in the Bastille, an old prisoner whom he had at Pignerol, says the Journal of Du Junker, lieutenant of the Bastille. His food, we saw, was brought him by Rossages alone. The major, a gentleman who had always been with Saint Mars, argues M. Funk Brentano. All this proves that the captive was a gentleman, not a valet. Why? First, because the Bastille, under Louis XI, was une prison de distinction. Yet M. Funk Brentano tells us that in Mazarin's time valets mixed up with royal plots were kept in the Bastille. Again, in 1701, in this noble prison, the mask was turned out of his room to make place for a female fortune teller and was obliged to chum with a profligate valet of 19 and a beggarly bad patriot who blamed the conduct of France and approved that of other nations, especially the Dutch. M. Funk Brentano himself publishes these facts. 1898, in part published earlier, 1890, by M. Lair. 1. Not much noblesse here. Next, if Rossages, a gentleman, served the mask, Saint Mars alone, 1669, carried his food to the valet, Dorja. So the service of Rossages does not ennoble the mask and differentiate him from Dorja, who was even more nobly served by Saint Mars. 1. Legends de la Bastille, pages 86-89, citing Du Junker's journal, the 30th of April, 1701. On November 19, 1703, the mask died suddenly, still in his velvet mask, and was buried on the 20th. The parish register of the church names him Marchiali or Marchiali. One may read it either way. Du Junker, lieutenant of the Bastille, in his contemporary journal, calls him M. de Marchial. Now, Saint Mars often spells Machiavelli, Marchiali. This is the one strength of the argument for Machiavelli's claims to the mask. M. Lair replies, Saint Mars had a mania for burying prisoners under fancy names, and gives examples. One is only a gardener, François Hilliard, 1701, concerning whom it is expressly said that, as he is a prisoner, his real name is not to be given, so he is registered as Pierre Merritt. Others read Navat. Peter Turnip. If Saint Mars, looking about for a false name for Dorja's burial register, hit on Marcelli, the name of Dorja's old master, that might be miswritten Marchiali. However it be, the age of the mask is certainly falsified. The register gives about 45 years old. Machiavelli would have been 63. Dorja cannot have been under 53. There the case stands. If Machiavelli died in April 1694, he cannot be the man in the iron mask. Of Dorja's death we find no record, unless he was the man in the iron mask, and died in 1703, in the Bastille. He was certainly, in 1669 and 1688, at Pignerol and at Sainte Marguerite, the center of the mystery about some great prisoner, a marshal of France, the Duc de Beaufort, or a son of Oliver Cromwell. Machiavelli was not mystery, no secret. Dorja is so mysterious that probably the secret of his mystery was unknown to himself. By 1701, when obscure wretches were shut up with the mask, the secret, whatever its nature, had ceased to be of moment. The captive was now the mere victim of cruel routine. But 20 years earlier, Saint Mars had said that Dorja takes things easily, resigned to the will of God and the king. To sum up, on the 1st of July, 1669, the valet of the Huguenot intriguer, Rue de Marseille, the valet resident in England, known to his master as Martin, was wanted by the French secret police. By the 19th of July, a valet, of the highest political importance, had been brought to Dunkirk, from England, no doubt. My hypothesis assumes that this valet, though now styled Eustache Dorja, was the Martin of Rue de Marseille. He was kept with so much mystery at Pigeonal that already the legend began its course. The captive valet was said to be a marshal of France. We then follow Dorja from Pignerol to Les Exiles, till January 1687, when one valet out of a pair, Dorja being one of them, dies. We presume that Dorja is the survivor, because the great mystery still is what he has done, whereas the other valet had done nothing, but may have known Dorja's secret. Again, the other valet had long been dropsical, and the valet who died in 1687 died of dropsy. In 1688, Dorja, at Sainte Marguerite, is again the source and center of myths. He is taken for a son of Oliver Cromwell, or for the Duc de Beaufort. In June 1692, one of the Huguenot preachers at Sainte Marguerite writes on his shirt and pewter plate and throws them out of the window. 1. Legend attributes these acts to the man in the iron mask, and transmutes a pewter into a silver plate. Now, in 1689-1693, Machiavelli was at Pignerol, but Dorja was at Sainte Marguerite, and the Huguenots act is attributed to him. Thus Dorja, not Machiavelli, is the center round which the myths crystallize. The legends concern him, not Machiavelli, whose case is well known, and gives rise to no legend. Finally, we have shown that Machiavelli probably died at Sainte Marguerite in April 1694. If so, then nobody but Dorja can be the old prisoner whom Saint Mars brought, masked, to the Bastille, in September 1698, and who died there in November 1703. However, suppose that Machiavelli did not die in 1694, but was the masked man who died in the Bastille in 1703, then the legend of Dorja came to be attributed to Machiavelli. These two men's fortunes are combined in the one myth. 1. Saint Mars or Minister, the 4th of June, 1692. The central problem remains unsolved. What had the valet, Eustache Dorja, done? 1. One marvels that nobody has recognized. In the mask, James Stuart James de la Cloche, eldest of the children of Charles II, he came to England in 1668, was sent to Rome, and disappears from history. See Infra, The Mystery of James de la Cloche. 3. The valet's master, the secret of the man in the iron mask, or at least of one of the two persons who have claims to be the mask, was what had Eustache Dorja done to guard this secret. The most extraordinary precautions were taken, as we have shown in the foregoing essay, and yet, if secret there was, it might have got wind in the simplest fashion. In the Vicomte de Bragelonne, Dumas describes the tryst of the secret hunters with the dying chief of the Jesuits at the inn in Fontainebleau. They come from many quarters. There is a baron of Germany and a laird from Scotland, but Aramis takes the prize. He knows the secret of the mask, the most valuable of all to the intriguers of the Company of Jesus. Now, despite all the precautions of Lavois and Saint Mars, despite sentinels forever posted under Dorja's windows, despite arrangements which made it impossible for him to signal to people on the hillside at Les Exiles, despite the suppression even of the items in the accounts of his expenses, his secret, if he knew it, could have been discovered, as we have remarked, by the very man most apt to make mischievous use of it, by Lawson. That brilliant and reckless adventurer could see Dorja, in prison at Pignerol, when he pleased, for he had secretly excavated a way into the rooms of his fellow prisoner, Fouquet, on whom Dorja attended as valet. Lawson was released soon after Fouquet's death. It is unlikely that he bought his liberty by the knowledge of the secret, and there is nothing to suggest that he used it, if he possessed it, in any other way. The natural clue to the supposed secret of Dorja is a study of the career of his master, Rue de Marseille. As official histories say next to nothing about him, we may set forth what can be gleaned from the state papers in our record office. The earliest is a letter of Rue de Marseille to Mr. Joseph Williamson, Secretary of Lord Arlington, December 1668. Marseille sends Martin on our theory Eustache Dorja, to bring back from Williamson 2 letters from his own correspondent in Paris. He also requests Williamson to procure for him from Arlington a letter of protection, as he is threatened with arrest for some debt in which he is not really concerned. Martin will explain. The next paper is endorsed received the 28th of December, 1668. Mons de Marseille, as it is dated the 27th of December. Marseille must have been in England. The contents of this piece deserve attention, because they show the terms on which Marseille and Arlington were, or, at least, how Marseille conceived them. 1. Marcelli reports, on the authority of his friends at Stockholm, that the King of Sweden intends, first to intercede with Louis XI in favor of the French Huguenots, and next, if diplomacy fails, to join in arms with the other Protestant powers of Europe. 2. His correspondent in Holland learns that if the King of England invites the states to any holy resolution, they will heartily lend forces. No leader so good as the English King, Charles II. Marcelli had shown Arlington's letter to a Dutch friend, who bade him approach the Dutch ambassador in England. He has dined with that diplomatist. Arlington had, then, gone so far as to write an encouraging letter. The Dutch ambassador had just told Marcelli that he had received the same news, namely, that Holland would aid the Huguenots, persecuted by Louis XI. 3. Letters from Provence, Languedoc, and Dauphine say that the situation there is unaltered. 4. The canton of Zurich write that they will keep their promises and that Bern is anxious to please the King of Great Britain, and that it is ready to raise, with Zurich, 15,000 men. They are not afraid of France. 5. Zurich fears that, if Charles is not represented at the next Diet, Bale and St. Gall will be intimidated, and not dare to join the Triple Alliance of Spain, Holland, and England. The best plan will be for Marcelli to represent England at the Diet of the 25th of January, 1669, accompanied by the Swiss General Balthazar. This will encourage friends to give His Britannic Majesty the satisfaction which he desires, and will produce a close union between Holland, Sweden, the cantons, and other Protestant states. This reads as if Charles had already expressed some desire. 6. Geneva grumbles at a reply of Charles through a bishop who is their enemy, the Bishop of London, a persecutor of our religion, that is, of Presbyterianism. However, nothing will dismay the Genevans. CSMB need change. Then comes a blank in the paper. There follows a copy of a letter as if from Charles to himself. To the right high and noble seigneurs of Zurich he has heard of their wishes from Rue de Marcelli, whom he commissions to wait upon them. I would not have written by my Bishop of London had I been better informed, but would myself have replied to your obliging letter, and would have assured you, as I do now, that I desire. It appears as if this were a draft of a kind of letter which Marcelli wanted Charles to write to Zurich, and there is a similar draft of a letter for Arlington to follow, if he and Charles wish to send Marcelli to the Swiss Diet. The Dutch ambassador, with whom Marcelli dined on the 26th of December, the Constable of Castile, and other grandees, are all of opinion that he should visit the Protestant Swiss. As from the King of England, the scheme is for an alliance of England, Holland, Spain, and the Protestant cantons, against France and Savoy. Another letter of Marcelli to Arlington, only dated Judy, avers that he can never repay Arlington for his extreme kindness and liberality. No man in England is more devoted to you than I am, and shall be all my life. 1. State Papers, France, Volume 125, 106. On the very day when Marcelli drafted for Charles his own commission to treat with Zurich for a Protestant alliance against France, Charles himself wrote to his sister, Madame Henriette d'Orleans. He spoke of his secret treaty with France. You know how much secrecy is necessary for the carrying on of the business, and I assure you that nobody does, nor shall, know anything of it here, but myself and that one person more, till it be fit to be public. 1. Is that one person de la Cloche? 1. Madam, by Julia Cartwright. Page 275. Thus Marcelli thought Charles almost engaged for the Protestant League, while Charles was secretly allying himself with France against Holland. Arlington was probably no less deceived by Charles than Marcelli was. The Bishop of London's share in the dealing with Zurich is obscure. It appears certain that Arlington was not consciously deceiving Marcelli. Madam wrote, on the 12th of February, as to Arlington, the man's attachment to the Dutch and his inclination towards Spain are too well known. 1. Not till the 25th of April, 1669, does Charles tell his sister that Arlington has an inkling of his secret dealings with France. How he knows, Charles cannot tell. 2. It is impossible for us to ascertain how far Charles himself deluded Marcelli, who went to the continent early in spring, 1669, before the 15th to the 25th of May 1669. In fact, on the 14th of April, Marcelli had been kidnapped by agents of Louis XI, and his doom was dight. Here is the account of the matter, written to by Perwich in Paris. 1. Ibid. Page 281. 2. Ibid. Page 285. W. Perwich 2. Paris, the 25th of May, 1969. Honored Sir, the cantons of Switzerland are much troubled at the French king's having sent 15 horsemen into Switzerland, from whence the Seigneur de Manille, the king's resident there, had given information of the Seigneur Rue de Marseilles being there negotiating the bringing the cantons into the Triple League by discourses much to the disadvantage of France, giving them very ill impressions of the French king's government, who was betrayed by a monk that kept him company and intercepted by the said horseman brought into France and is expected at the Bastille. I believe you know the man. I remember him in England. Can this monk be the monk who went mad in prison at Pignerol, sharing the cell of Machiavelli? Did he, too, suffer for his connection with the secret? We do not know, but the position of Charles was awkward. Marseilles, dealing with the Swiss, had come straight from England, where he was lie with Charles's minister, Arlington, and with the Dutch and Spanish ambassadors. The king refers to the matter in a letter to his sister of the 24th of May, 1669, misdated by Miss Cartwright, the 24th of May, 1668, 1. Madam, by Julia Cartwright, page 264. You have, I hope, received full satisfaction by the last post in the matter of Marseilles. For my LD, Arlington has sent to Mr. Montag, English ambassador at Paris, his history all the time he was here, by which you will see how little credit he had here, and that particularly my Lord Arlington was not in his good graces, because he did not receive that satisfaction, in his negotiation, he expected, and that was only in relation to the Swisses, and so I think I have said enough of this matter. Charles took it easily. On the 15th of May 25, Montag acknowledged Arlington's letter to which Charles refers. He has been approached, as to Marseilles, by the Spanish resident, but I could not tell how to do anything in the business, never having heard of the man, or that he was employed by my master Charles in any business. I have sent you also a copy of a letter which an Englishman writ to me that I do not know, in behalf of Rue de Marseilles, but that does not come by the post, being too secret. 1. State Papers, France, Volume 126. France had been well informed about Marseilles while he was in England. He then had a secretary, 2 lackeys, and a valet de chamber, and was frequently in conference with Arlington and the Spanish ambassador to the English court. Colbert, the French ambassador in London, had written all this to the French government, on the 25th of April, before he heard of Marseilles' arrest. 1. Bible, Nat. Thons. Francais, number 10665. The belief that Marseilles was an agent of Charles appears to have been general, and, if accepted by Louis XIV, would interfere with Charles's private negotiations for the secret treaty with France. On the 18th of May, Prince d'Aremberg had written on the subject to the Spanish ambassador in Paris. Marseilles, he says, was arrested in Switzerland, on his way to Bern, with a monk who was also seized, and, a curious fact, Marseilles' valet was killed in the struggle. This valet, of course, was not Dorger, whom Marseilles had left in England. Marseilles doit avoir demandé la protection du roi de la Grande-Bretagne en faveur des religionnaires, Huguenots de France, et passer en Suisse avec quelque commission de sa part. D'Aremberg begs the Spanish ambassador to communicate all this to Montag, the English ambassador at Paris, but Montag probably, like Perwich, knew nothing of the business any more than he knew of Charles's secret dealings with Louis through Madame. 1. State Papers, France Volume 126. To d'Aremberg's letter is pinned an unsigned English note, obviously intended for Arlington's reading. Rue de Marseilles is still in the Bastille, though they have a mind to hang him, yet they are much puzzled what to do with him. De Lion has been to examine him twice or thrice, but there is no witness to prove anything against him. I was told by one that the French king told it to, that in his papers they find great mention of the Duke of Bucks, and your name, and speak as if he were much trusted by you. I have inquired what this Marseilles is, and I find by one Mr. Marseilles that I am acquainted with Al, and a man of quality, that this man's name is Wanley Roux, and born at Nismes, and having been formerly a soldier in his troop, ever since has taken his name to gain more credit in Switzerland, where he, Marseilles, formerly used to be employed by his Col, Maréchal de Schomberg, who invaded Switzerland. We next find a very curious letter, from which it appears that the French government inclined to regard Marcely as, in fact, an agent of Charles, but thought it wiser to trump up against him a charge of conspiring against the life of Louis-Yves. On this charge, or another, he was executed, while the suspicion that he was an agent of English treachery may have been the real cause of the determination to destroy him. The Balthazar with whom Marcely left his papers is mentioned with praise by him in his paper for Arlington, of the 27th of December, 1668. He is the general who should have accompanied Marcely to the Diet. The substance of the letter, given in full in Note I, is to the following effect. P. du Moulin, Paris, the 19th of May 29 1669, writes to Arlington, ever since Rouvigny, the late French ambassador, a Protestant, was in England, the French government had been anxious to kidnap Rue de Marcely. They hunted him in England, Holland, Flanders, and Franche-Comté. As we know from the case of Marcely, the government of Louis-Yves was unscrupulously daring in breaking the laws of nations, and seizing hostile personages in foreign territory, as Napoleon did in the affair of the Duc d'Enghien. When all failed, Louis bade Turenne capture Rue de Marcely wherever he could find him. Turenne sent officers and gentlemen abroad, and, after 4 months' search, they found Marcely in Switzerland. They took him as he came out of the house of his friend, General Balthazar, and carried him to Gex. No papers were found on him, but he asked his captors to send to Balthazar and get the commission he had from England, which he probably thought would give him the security of an official diplomatic position. Having got this document, Marcely's captors took it to the French ministers. Nothing could be more embarrassing, if this were true, to Charles's representative in France, Montague, and to Charles's secret negotiations, also to Arlington, who had dealt with Marcely. On his part, the captive Marcely constantly affirmed that he was the envoy of the King of England. The common talk of Paris was that an agent of Charles was in the Bastille, though at court they pretended to know nothing of it. Louis was overjoyed at Marcely's capture, giving out that he was conspiring against his life. Monsieur told Montague that he need not beg for the life of a would-be murderer like Marcely. But as to this idea, they begin now to mince it at court, and Rouvigny assured du Moulin that they had no such thoughts. De Leon had seen Marcely and observed that it was a blunder to seize him. The French government was nervous, and Turenne's secretary had been pumping several ambassadors as to what they thought of Marcely's capture on foreign territory. One ambassador replied with spirit that a crusade of all Europe against France, as of old against the Moslems, would be necessary. Would Charles? Du Moulin asked. Own or disown Marcely? Montague's position was now awkward. On the 23rd of May, his account of the case was read, at Whitehall.